This is the CBS Evening News. Connie Chung reporting. Good evening. The seven-nation economic summit ended today in Paris with unusual harmony. President Bush declaring it a clear success. But at the same time, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev successfully upstaged the meeting with a surprise letter to the leaders offering greatly expanded Soviet economic cooperation. CBS News White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews has more from Paris.
The summit leaders wrapped up this meeting calling attention to pollution, drug problems, and third world debt, but wound up paying attention to someone who wasn't even here. Mikhail Gorbachev's unique letter to the summit, seeking to move the Soviet economy into the world system, was seen here as such an admission of defeat for communism, the leaders of the West began to brainstorm about what it could all lead to.
And this letter, just one more manifestation of the exciting times we're in, of change. They're moving towards our open system, our free system, our system of free elections.
Despite the air of Western victory, Mr. Bush said the leaders sensed a possible Gorbachev publicity stunt, and no one sees Gorbachev invited to any summit of capitalists anytime soon.
There's an awful lot that has to transpire in the Soviet Union, it seems to me, before anything of that nature would be considered. We're talking about free market economies here.
Still, Gorbachev's letter, the president's trip to Poland and Hungary, and a Western backdrop of prosperity only added to the sense of being on a roll.
I am very satisfied. I am very satisfied that...
For the first time, there was an emphasis here on cleaning up the world's environment. The leaders demanded studies on global warming, called the problem urgent, but made no commitments about cleaning up their own countries. Mr. Bush claimed that was progress.
I think many environmental groups see the very fact that this matter was on the front burner as being very positive.
True, but those environmental groups also accuse the summit of being lazy, of missing the chance to make real progress.
Rhetoric is terrific. Discussions are great, but we feel it's time for specific commitments, timetables on these issues.
The Gorbachev letter, meanwhile, has the president's top advisors in hot speculation about a future Soviet Union with a stock exchange, free markets, and even unemployment. It's as if to the White House, Gorbachev may have just issued the final rejection of Khrushchev's old threat, "We will bury you." Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, Paris.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher leaves the summit and some controversy behind her. She was accused of insulting France by discounting the importance of the French Revolution 200 years ago. And for that, some thought her seating position at formal events was changed to reflect French displeasure. Today, she made light of any perceived slight.
We've had very good, very good, excellent relationship between President Mitterrand and myself. I haven't had anything which could even remotely be termed a slight. Indeed, I've had every attention. You look very disappointed.
Tom Fenton, our chief European correspondent, is with us live at the summit headquarters in Paris with some thoughts on the economic summit. Tom?
Connie, sometimes at these summits, when the leaders describe the results, they seem to be talking about entirely different summits. It's a bit like the proverbial blind men describing an elephant. This time, there was an unusual unanimity of views. All the leaders seem to be describing the same elephant.
The summit has been very amicable indeed. Very amicable, very constructive.
And why not? The economy of the West is in relatively good shape. The Cold War seems like a distant memory, and there's excitement and change in the air. Changing personal relationships as well. Something new is the good chemistry between President Bush and French President Mitterrand. Mitterrand said Mr. Bush is well-informed and open-minded. Coming from the French president, that's a real compliment. The odd woman out at this summit was Mrs. Thatcher. Her standing among world leaders seems to have slipped since her strongest supporter, President Reagan, left office. If there were differences at this summit, they were mostly over the lack of concrete programs in the final communique. No new plans to spend any real money on the world's problems.
This was also the summit in which the new Europe seemed to come of age. For the first time ever, the common market was given the task of coordinating all Western aid to Poland and Hungary. Connie?
Tom, how have the Europeans reacted to the Gorbachev letter?
There have been different reactions. Chancellor Kohl of West Germany, who really wants better relations with the Soviet Union, said it was a remarkable letter. Prime Minister Thatcher was a good deal less positive. And President Mitterrand threw cold water on a suggestion that Mr. Gorbachev could ever be invited to one of the summits. He pointed out that only democracies are invited. There's also some question about whether this is really a new departure in Soviet policy. Mr. Gorbachev in the past has talked about making the economies of the East and West more interdependent in order to reduce tensions between communist and capitalist countries.
And why did he send it?
Well, certainly to dramatize this policy, even if it's nothing new. And also, he's certainly looking for a little economic help from the West. Connie?
All right. Thank you, Tom Fenton. American diplomats said today the United States will keep selling large quantities of wheat to China despite trade sanctions imposed following last month's Tiananmen Square massacre. American trade authorities say sanctions on grain would hurt only the Chinese people, not the government. Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, David Martin on another Soviet submarine in trouble off the coast of Norway. And later on Inside Sunday, the new European market. The competition is building. Norwegian military says a Soviet nuclear-powered submarine caught fire today off the coast of Norway. It was the third Soviet submarine accident in that area in 4 months. And Pentagon correspondent David Martin has our report.
The Soviets said it was just an exercise, but Norwegian defense officials said today that another nuclear-powered Soviet submarine appears to have caught fire off their coast.
We believe that it was some sort of accident. Perhaps it have been an exercise. It is very difficult for us to believe that the exercise should give so much smoke.
This time it was an Alpha-class submarine, once billed as the fastest, deepest diving sub in the world. But this Alpha is now on the surface, moving slowly toward a Soviet port. No word yet on what may have caused the fire, whether there were any casualties or whether there was any leakage of radiation, either from the sub's reactors or from the nuclear weapons it is presumed to carry.
We have a research ship in the area which shall take water examples, but it is too early to say if there is any radiation.
Last month, the fire aboard another nuclear-powered Soviet sub, this one an Echo class, caught fire and leaked small amounts of radiation. In April, 42 Soviet sailors died when a Mike-class submarine caught fire and sank, again off the coast of Norway.
The American Navy has been warning for years about the threat posed by an increasingly sophisticated fleet of Soviet submarines. But if today's incident was really an accident, the Soviet submarine fleet would seem to pose a greater threat to its own sailors than to the U.S. Navy. David Martin, CBS News, Los Angeles.
There has been more ethnic unrest in the Soviet Union. The government news agency says Muslims fought Christian Georgians with knives and guns in a Black Sea resort, killing 11 people. The report says Soviet troops were called in to end the fighting. Another problem for the Moscow leadership is the Siberian coal miners' strike. Soviet newspapers report today that the strike, now involving 100,000 miners, is spreading to other industries. President Bush said today he has not made a decision yet on his major goals for the U.S. space program. There had been speculation he would make an announcement this Thursday, the 20th anniversary of the day man first set foot on the moon. Today, the men who took that giant leap for mankind were reliving the glory days of American space exploration. Erin Hayes reports.
This weekend, NASA was holding fast to its glory days on the moon. Apollo 11's astronauts were on display, today at Cape Canaveral, yesterday at the Marshall Space Center, greeting the folks.
Very nice to meet you.
Patient with fans, they have not been so patient with NASA's progress. The moon landing was supposed to be followed by much more. More people on the moon, man well on his way to Mars by now. And many of the scientists who got us on the moon 20 years ago are disappointed that's as far as we've gone.
There are many of us who are not really satisfied.
Ernst Stuhlinger worked on Apollo 11 and wants to see an astronaut on Mars.
And that is a decision that must come from the highest ranks in our government, from the president himself.
But with the last footprint in moon soil in 1972, that commitment seemed to dry up.
Basically, every president since the Apollo program has rejected the idea that the space program can serve any national purpose.
We can't promise the moon on a budget that can't get us around the corner.
And that disappoints Buzz Aldrin.
This nation's always been pioneers. It's ours to go for or withdraw.
With the moonwalk, some say, we opened the door to a new frontier. Now they say it's time to walk through it. Erin Hayes, CBS News, Huntsville, Alabama.
The world of classical music has lost one of its legendary figures. Austrian conductor Herbert von Karajan died today at the age of 81. Von Karajan, who had led the Berlin Philharmonic for more than 3 decades, sold more classical recordings than any other conductor. But his membership in the Nazi Party led the Allies to ban von Karajan from conducting for 2 years after World War II.
Get ready for a new eye drop so refreshing you won't believe your eyes.
Wow! The economic interdependence that was on display in Paris today does not end with the summit. Tonight on Inside Sunday, a look at some of the international cooperation and competition that's now underway. First, a competition that could have a big impact on the U.S. economy. American companies are jockeying for position in a brand new market today, 3 years before it officially opens.
Europe is going to be one of the fastest growing, possibly the fastest growing area in the 1990s.
That's why American companies like 3M have been charging toward 1992. 1992, the year when the 12 countries of the European Common Market are due to drop all internal trade and tariff barriers, creating one huge market with an economy the size of the United States. For American companies, it's reason enough to try to get a bigger piece of the action.
Well, I think the growth potential for 3M is very significant here. I think it's very exciting.
Growth there, but not necessarily here.
There will be some companies which will be very tempted by this to locate that new factory, that next factory, in Europe.
Take this 3M Technology Center just outside Paris. Built in 1986, it adapts U.S. products for the European market. But it also does a growing amount of research.
We have increased our laboratory spending in Europe, mainly to grow faster there.
At least for now, it's a win-win situation for both 3M and the United States balance of trade. By setting up shop in Europe, 3M has created a market not only for the products it makes there, but also for products that, for whatever reason, are still made only in the United States.
We find that if we didn't manufacture there, we wouldn't be able to export that much.
But the prospect of 330 million consumers in an economy of $5 trillion could change all that. Could tempt some U.S. companies to do more than just get their ankles wet in European waters.
Europe is going to be a very attractive place for firms to put their new investment, their new headquarters, and their new research and development facilities.
With major consequences here at home. Loss of basic new technology, lost factories, lost jobs. Right now, 3M says it isn't even thinking about that kind of relocation. What it does say is that the United States needs to go on the offensive to meet the challenge of the United States of Europe.
The thing we have to do is have a philosophy and a government that encourages us to go out and compete.
At the economic summit, the United States and Japan agreed to try again to settle differences over access to each other's markets. Now a similar dispute is brewing between Europe and Japan. And as business correspondent Ray Brady reports, Japanese cars are parked right in the middle of it.
It's merry old England, and those are British workers. But they're wearing Japanese-style blue uniforms because this is a plant owned by Nissan, the big Japanese car maker. Exactly as they did in the U.S., the Japanese are building auto plants in England. And like the U.S., that's sparking controversy.
It shouldn't be the Japanese who's running these companies. It should be British.
Soon, Nissan will make 200,000 cars a year at this plant. Executives from Toyota already have selected this airfield for $1 billion auto factory, and Honda has plans to build in Britain as well. Altogether, that's enough capacity to give Japan nearly a quarter of the whole European car market.
I think it will be a threat to the European car companies because already in Europe there is excess capacity.
But the Japanese have their reasons. In 1992, Europe becomes one giant common market. The Japanese fear that if they don't have plants here by then, they could be kept out of that market.
The European market as a whole represents more than, say, 35% world global market. So obviously this is the most important market in the world.
But right now, France and Italy strictly limit the number of Japanese cars coming in. But under new 1992 laws, that will change. These Japanese made-in-England cars can go in without restriction. And that has the two countries mad as hornets.
There are so many obstacles to trade in Japan, and the result of that is that the Japanese sell almost 10 times more cars in Europe than we sell in Japan.
Despite that fact, Europeans are beginning to hear a refrain about their car companies that's familiar to American ears.
What they then have to do is to make themselves as efficient as the Japanese and ask the consumer to buy their cars rather than Japanese cars.
So for many of the common market countries meeting here, their biggest problem may be one that has long faced the United States. The question of how each of them can learn to live with all those Japanese cars rolling off the assembly lines. Ray Brady, CBS News, Paris.
Coming up next, how the United States is lending a hand to a neighbor in debt. Inside Sunday continues in a moment on the CBS Evening News. There was a dramatic reunion in London today of...
That is the visa that I came on, 30th of March, 39.
In London today, hundreds of the war's child refugees gathered to share their memories and commemorate their escape.
So tell us what happened.
The plight of Jewish children driven from Germany has stirred the sympathy and conscience of the rest of the world.
It was 1939. Jewish families were trying desperately to get their children out of Nazi Germany. The British government agreed to take them in. In an operation called Kinder Transport, nearly 10,000 children were ferried to Britain to be placed in foster homes.
For many of these innocents don't even know the whereabouts of their parents, let alone their fate.
Vera Gissing was just 10 years old when her parents sent her away from Czechoslovakia. Before leaving, Vera's mother took her to an open window and pointed to the stars.
And she said to me, there may be times when we can't write to one another, and even while we can, let the stars of the night and the sun of the day be the messenger of our thoughts and love, and in that way we will never be alone.
Vera Gissing could not have escaped without the help of a British stockbroker, Nicholas Winton, who organized the evacuation of 660 children from Czechoslovakia.
The proof that how right we were and the time was of the essence was that our biggest transport, which was due to leave on the 1st of September, never left, because that was the day war was declared. And all those 250 children on those on that last transport were never heard of again.
Many of the parents were never heard from either.
They died in Auschwitz together with all the others.
Vera Gissing's mother died in a concentration camp, her father on a death march. But she says hers is not entirely a sad story. The evil that killed her parents inspired the kindness that saved her life. That is what she remembered at today's reunion. Anthony Mason, CBS News, London.
And that's our news. Charles Carroll will be here tomorrow sitting in for Dan Rather. And later tonight, Bill Plant with the CBS Sunday Night News. I'm Connie Chung in New York. Thank you for joining us, and for all of us at CBS News, good night.
I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, President Daniel Ortega on the 10th anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution. Also, Vanna White joins us and Mel Gibson on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.